In the stillness of the morning, before the first ray of sunlight touches the world, there is a sound that only the soul can hear, the whisper of something ancient calling to be remembered. The old mystics believed that healing does not begin with the body but with the remembrance of what you are. They called it the return, the moment the scattered pieces of the soul remember their way home. The Kabbalists spoke of this as a ritual not of worship, but of awakening. They believed that within every cell there is a divine echo, a spark of the infinite light that desires harmony, order, and peace. The ritual they performed was not a ceremony of grandeur but of simplicity, a communion between breath, intention, and vibration. And in this sacred simplicity, they discovered what the modern world has forgotten, that the body is not merely flesh, but a living scripture written in light. It began with water. Not ordinary water, but living water, mayim chayim. They believed that water held memory, that it carried the whispers of creation itself. In their teachings, every molecule of water was like a letter in the sacred alphabet of the universe. When spoken to, when blessed, it responded. The Kabbalists would fill a vessel of clear water, place it under the dawn light, and begin to chant the ancient names, vibrations that aligned matter with spirit. Each sound was a frequency, a sacred key that unlocked the dormant forces of renewal within and without. The ritual was not about commanding the divine, but harmonizing with it. They knew that the universe listens to intention wrapped in silence, and so they would whisper the names with reverence, letting the air between words become a sanctuary for healing. They said the body is a mirror of the tree of life. Every organ, every pathway corresponds to a sephira, a divine channel of energy. The heart, the mind, the liver, the blood, all are instruments in the cosmic symphony of existence. When one instrument falls out of tune, the song of life becomes distorted. The Kabbalists believed that by aligning the energies of the tree within, one could restore balance to the physical body. They did not see illness as punishment, but as separation, a disconnection between the inner and outer light. To heal, one had to remember. To remember, one had to listen, and the ritual was the act of listening deeply to the pulse of the universe within one's own chest. They would begin with the breath of light, a slow inhalation through the nose, holding the breath just long enough to feel the heartbeat, and then releasing it softly as if exhaling prayer. In the stillness that followed, they would visualize a golden thread descending from the heavens, entering through the crown of the head, flowing through the body, reaching the feet and anchoring them to the earth. This was not imagination. It was alignment. To them, the breath carried the ruach, the divine spirit that animates all life. Each inhalation was a return to source, each exhalation, a release of all that clouded the inner light. As they breathed, they would recite the sacred sound Yod-He-Vav-He, not as 4 letters, but as a vibration that resonated through the cells, awakening the hidden memory of divine order within. The ritual required humility. Before invoking light, they would wash the hands in water, symbolizing the purification of action. Then they would touch the forehead, the heart, and the navel, drawing invisible circles, the symbol of Ein Sof, the infinite. This was to remind themselves that healing does not come from control, but surrender. The Kabbalists knew that the same intelligence that guides the stars also guides the healing of a wound. Their task was not to interfere, but to align. As they chanted the names, they did not beg for healing. They invoked remembrance, the remembrance that they were already whole. Science now speaks of frequencies, vibrations, and resonance. The ancients spoke of the same in the language of light. They believed every word, every thought, creates ripples through the unseen field of creation. The Kabbalists called it Or Ein Sof, the endless light, the living consciousness that animates all. When a person speaks words of blessing over water, over food, over their own heart, those vibrations reorder the chaos within matter. Healing, they said, is the return of divine order to the field of the body. Illness is not an enemy, but a message, a note out of tune in the symphony of being. The ritual was a dialogue with that message, a conversation between the human and the divine. They would gather salt, the crystal memory of the ocean, the witness of time. To them, salt was more than a mineral. It was the essence of preservation, a symbol of eternity. They would dissolve a pinch of salt in the sacred water and stir it clockwise, always clockwise, for that is the direction of creation, the spiral of life unfolding. As they stirred, they whispered the intention, not in demand, but in devotion. They believed that the universe responds not to words, but to the vibration behind them. The true prayer is not spoken by the mouth, but by the soul. The ritual continued with light. A candle would be lit, not for ceremony, but for remembrance. Fire, they believed, was the visible body of the invisible light. It symbolized transformation, the constant dance between form and formlessness. They would gaze at the flame, breathing gently, until the boundary between themselves and the light dissolved. In that moment, they were no longer seeking healing, they were becoming it. The flame became the heart, the water became the blood, the salt became the memory, and the breath became the bridge. Everything was one continuum, the human and the divine indistinguishable. There are fragments of these teachings hidden in old manuscripts, scattered between Hebrew letters and mystical commentaries. But the true knowledge, the Kabbalists said, was never written. It could only be received, passed from heart to heart in silence. They knew that the body is a living temple, and that the soul speaks in the language of sensation. Pain, fatigue, tension, these were not curses but signals, invitations to return to alignment. The ritual taught the practitioner to listen with the inner ear, to see with the inner eye, to feel the currents of energy that flow through the body like rivers of light. As dawn turned to morning, the ritual ended with gratitude, not the casual thankfulness of habit, but the sacred gratitude that bends reality itself. They believed that gratitude was the highest frequency of all, the vibration that harmonizes the soul with the divine source. When the heart is grateful, it becomes magnetic to miracles, so they would lift the vessel of water to the light, whisper the final blessing, and drink, slowly, consciously, as if drinking the memory of Eden. They said that in that moment, the water becomes medicine, the body becomes temple, and the soul remembers it was never sick, only sleeping. Modern science might see this as metaphor, yet even now studies reveal that water reacts to emotion, that intention changes molecular patterns, that sound can heal tissue. The Kabbalists did not need microscopes, they saw with the inner eye. They knew that when light and sound intertwine with consciousness, creation responds. Their ritual was not superstition, it was participation, a co-creation with the divine intelligence that sustains all life. And perhaps that is why, even centuries later, their wisdom still feels alive, because it speaks to something buried in each of us, a knowing that the body remembers harmony, that healing is not something we seek, but something we return to. The Kabbalists called it tikkun, restoration, repair, the mending of what was fragmented. To heal the body, they said, is to heal the world. To heal the world, one must heal the perception that it was ever broken. The ritual of healing, then, is not a practice of magic, but of remembrance. A remembrance that within every breath, every drop of water, every flicker of flame, the infinite whispers, "I am still here." The journey has only begun. The light is waiting to be remembered. There is a reason the ancients spoke of light as the first creation. Before form, before sound, before even thought itself, there was light. And in that primordial radiance, the Kabbalists saw the origin of all healing. They believed that disease, darkness, and despair were merely shadows cast by the forgetting of that light. Their rituals were acts of remembrance, bringing the hidden radiance back into awareness. And they claimed that when the inner light is remembered, the outer world begins to change. The skin glows differently, the breath deepens, the heart returns to rhythm. Because light, they said, is not only around us, it is within us, woven into the very structure of our being. The Zohar, the sacred text of the Kabbalists, calls the human body a microcosm of the universe. It teaches that the same divine energy that expands galaxies also circulates through your veins. When they studied the letters of the Torah, they were not reading stories. They were reading the architecture of creation, the codes that sustain matter. Every Hebrew letter, they said, is a vessel for light. Each one contains an energetic frequency that governs both spirit and substance. The name of God was not a title to them, but a formula, a living sequence of vibrations capable of reordering the human field. And when pronounced correctly, in alignment with breath and heart, it could transform the molecular reality of the body. The ritual of healing was thus not about words alone, but about resonance. The Kabbalists taught that everything in existence vibrates. The stones, the stars, the organs, the emotions. Each has its own frequency. Illness occurs when these frequencies fall out of harmony. The sacred names were used to retune the soul, much like a musician tunes a harp, and when the soul's music returned to harmony, the body followed. This was not faith in the abstract. It was precise, energetic science, though the modern world has only begun to rediscover it under new names: quantum coherence, vibrational medicine, frequency therapy. They often began with the Shema, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." But to them, this was not a prayer of devotion. It was a declaration of unity. The Lord is one meant there is no separation between heaven and earth, between body and spirit, between sickness and healing. The same divine essence that moves through galaxies moves through your bloodstream. The separation is only illusion, and when that illusion is dissolved through remembrance, healing happens naturally. The body does not need to be forced to heal. It needs to be reminded of its original harmony. They believed the heart was the true temple, not a metaphorical one, a literal energetic gateway between the worlds. When the heart opens, they said, the upper and lower realms connect, allowing light to flow freely into the body. Modern science calls this heart coherence, the alignment of rhythm between the heart, brain, and breath. But the Kabbalists knew this centuries ago. In their rituals, the first act was always to soften the heart through compassion, for self, for others, for all living things. Compassion, they said, is the bridge through which divine energy enters matter. Without it, no healing is possible. So they began every ritual with forgiveness, not as a moral act, but as an energetic cleansing. Forgiveness opens the channels, resentment blocks them. When a person forgives, the field becomes porous again, allowing light to flow. And as that light flows, the vibration of every cell begins to rise. The water in the body, 70% of what we are, begins to restructure. The blood carries new codes. The immune system awakens. The mind becomes still. This, they said, is why the prophets spoke of purity not as ritual cleanliness, but as alignment with divine vibration. Purity meant clarity, the ability to let the infinite flow through without resistance. The sacred names they used, Yod, He, Vav, He, were more than symbols. Each letter represented an element of existence. Yod was fire, He was water, Vav was air, and the final, He was earth. Together they formed the pattern of creation itself. By breathing through the sequence of these letters, the Kabbalists believed one could harmonize the four elements within, balancing thought, emotion, breath, and body. The imbalance of these forces, they taught, is what gives rise to suffering. Too much fire burns into anger. Too much water drowns in emotion. Too much air loses focus. Too much earth hardens into stagnation. The divine name was the sacred equilibrium, the formula that brought all things back to balance. In their rituals, they would visualize the tree of life, 10 spheres connected by 22 pathways, each representing a flow of divine energy. The tree was not an abstraction to them, it was the energetic anatomy of the soul. Each sephira corresponded to a gland, an organ, a region of the body. The Kabbalists mapped the divine structure onto human physiology long before modern anatomy existed. When they meditated upon the tree, they were activating neural pathways, balancing hormones, synchronizing the electromagnetic fields that govern the cells. They would trace the light from the crown above the head, down through the heart, into the root of the spine. The same pathway modern mystics now call the central channel or kundalini. They knew the divine light was not static. It flowed, spiraled, danced through the human form. The more they worked with this light, the more they realized it was responsive. It reacted to emotion, to thought, to sound. The body, they said, is a mirror of consciousness. When you think with fear, the mirror darkens. When you think with love, it shines. Healing was therefore not the act of fixing something broken, but of cleaning the mirror so the divine reflection could be seen again. And once the reflection was restored, the body followed effortlessly, naturally, as a shadow follows the sun. The Kabbalists also understood that the earth itself participates in healing. They believed every stone, every herb, every grain of salt carries an aspect of divine intelligence. The ritual used simple elements, salt, water, light, because they are the most ancient expressions of creation. Salt preserves, water purifies, light transforms. Together they form the trinity of healing, memory, motion, illumination. To them, salt was not merely sodium, it was crystallized time, the condensed essence of the sea, carrying the memory of creation. When dissolved in water and blessed with intention, it reawakened that memory, reminding the body of its eternal nature. They also used herbs not for their chemistry alone, but for their vibration: rosemary for remembrance, frankincense for connection to spirit, myrrh for purification, mint for clarity of thought. Each plant was seen as a living soul, a being carrying specific frequencies of light. When combined with prayer and sound, the plants became instruments in the orchestra of healing. Their fragrance rising in the air was not just aroma, but a form of prayer made visible. The deeper one went into these teachings, the clearer it became. Healing was not something external, but an act of alignment between the visible and the invisible. The Kabbalists said that when the inner and outer worlds harmonize, miracles appear ordinary. They did not chase miracles, they cultivated harmony. Miracles, they said, are not exceptions to nature, they are nature remembered. Their secret text spoke of a hidden light, the organuz, which God concealed after the first days of creation. It was said that this light was too powerful for the unprepared, that only the pure-hearted could access it. But the mystics claimed that through love, forgiveness, and sacred sound, the light could be drawn forth again, not from the heavens, but from within. When a person awakens this inner light, they become a vessel of healing for others. Their presence alone changes rooms, purifies spaces, calms hearts. The true healer, they said, heals not through words or touch, but through the radiance that flows from their coherence with the infinite. To modern ears, these may sound like legends, but beneath the poetry lies science, frequencies, electromagnetic resonance, neurochemistry, and water memory. Everything the mystics taught can now be measured in waves and particles, yet no instrument can capture the essence of what they knew, that healing is not about matter, it is about meaning. The moment one restores meaning to their pain, light returns. The moment one forgives, the current flows. The moment one remembers their divine origin, the illusion of sickness begins to dissolve. And so the ritual continued through generations, whispered from master to student, guarded not because it was secret, but because it was sacred. The Kabbalists feared that without reverence, the ritual would lose its power. For reverence itself is part of the formula. Without it, intention becomes manipulation. With it, intention becomes creation. They taught that every true healer must first become humble, for humility is the vessel that holds the infinite. It is said that when the great mystic Isaac Luria healed a dying man, he did not touch him. He only looked into his eyes and recited a verse under his breath. The man wept, trembled, and rose as if reborn. The bystanders called it a miracle. But Luria smiled and said softly, "He remembered." That was the essence of the ritual, remembrance, not of doctrine or dogma, but of the divine harmony that never left. The ritual was the bridge between forgetfulness and awakening, between shadow and light, between suffering and peace. And in this remembrance lies the revelation that the true healer is not the one who removes the pain, but the one who helps others see that the light was never gone. Healing is not found in the stars, in temples, or in formulas. It is found in the space between the heartbeat and the breath, where silence speaks and the soul remembers its name. There comes a moment in every seeker's path when knowledge alone is no longer enough. The words, the symbols, the chants, all become hollow if the heart does not open. The Kabbalists understood this. They knew that true healing begins not in the mind, but in the quiet surrender of the heart. To transform, one must let go of the illusion of control. That is why their ritual, though filled with sacred language and divine geometry, was ultimately an act of surrender. They called it Bitul Hayesh, the nullification of the self, the dissolving of all boundaries between the human and the divine. For in that sacred disappearance, something miraculous happens. The body remembers its origin and the light flows freely once more. They said that illness is not chaos but conversation. The body speaks in sensations, in pulses, in whispers of imbalance. Pain is not punishment, it is a message. The message says, "You have forgotten who you are." The ritual's power was not in driving pain away, but in listening to it with reverence. When one listens deeply enough, pain becomes a doorway. Through it, light can enter. The Kabbalists taught that to heal the body, you must listen not with ears but with spirit. Feel the vibration of pain without judgment. Let it vibrate until it transforms. Everything in existence seeks return. Even pain seeks to return to light. They told a story of a student who came to his master, trembling with fear, saying that his heart ached and his body was weak. The master did not give him herbs or prayers. He simply handed him a bowl of water and said, "Hold it until your reflection stops shaking." The student stared at the water, but his trembling made the surface ripple endlessly. Hours passed. Slowly the shaking stopped, and his reflection became still. When he looked up, the master said, "Now your heart knows what your mind has forgotten, that stillness heals what movement cannot." The ritual of healing was, at its core, the practice of stillness. In stillness, the water clears. In stillness, the light returns. In stillness, the divine speaks. The Kabbalists called this stillness devikut, the state of attachment to the divine. In that state, one no longer asks for healing, because one is healing itself. The separation dissolves. The boundaries between the cells and the cosmos blur. Breath becomes prayer. Silence becomes song. And within that song, transformation begins. Modern science might call it neuroplasticity or cellular regeneration, but to the mystics it was the movement of light within matter, the infinite reorganizing itself through consciousness. They would say that each time you forgive, a cell begins to glow again. Each time you speak a word of blessing, the blood flows with more coherence. Each time you feel gratitude, the immune system awakens. To them, transformation was not about becoming something new. It was about remembering something ancient, your original light. The soul, they said, is pure. It cannot be stained, only obscured. And healing is the clearing of that obscurity. Like sunlight passing through clouds, the light is always there. The clouds are only thoughts, emotions, fears, regrets. When they part, the light shines without effort. The Kabbalists used the sacred sound, Ehye Asher Ehye, I am that I am, as the invocation of pure being. They would breathe it in rhythm with their heartbeat, feeling the resonance in their chest until every cell began to vibrate in unison. It was not recitation, it was revelation. The sound was the bridge between the finite and the infinite, the code that reminded the body it was born of light. Transformation, they taught, happens when the will of the human merges with the will of the divine. That is why the ritual was always done in humility. Pride blocks the current. Humility opens it. The one who seeks to command the light cannot receive it. The one who kneels before it becomes one with it. The mystics used to say that water cannot flow uphill. The same is true for divine energy. It flows to the lowest point, to the heart that has surrendered. The Kabbalists would sit on the floor during their rituals, sometimes barefoot, sometimes in silence for hours, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath them. They believed the earth itself was alive, breathing in rhythm with the stars. To touch it was to remember the body's origin. Dust and light, breath and soil, divinity and decay, all one continuum. They also believed that transformation must be felt, not forced. Many seekers, they said, try to do healing. But healing cannot be done. It can only be allowed. The ritual, therefore, was about creating the right conditions. When water, salt, breath, and light are brought together in harmony, healing becomes inevitable. Like a seed placed in fertile soil, it grows because the conditions allow it, not because the seed strains to become a tree. The body is no different. When you align the mind, the breath and the intention, the divine blueprint within you begins to express itself again. The body knows how to heal. The soul only needs to remember how to allow. The Kabbalists often spoke of Simcha Shel Mitzvah, the joy of alignment. They knew that joy is the natural vibration of the soul. When one returns to their natural frequency, joy arises spontaneously, not as an emotion, but as an energetic state. Joy, they said, is the sound of the soul remembering its light. In that vibration, transformation accelerates. The cells begin to hum with coherence. The organs regain rhythm. The mind quiets. Joy heals because it reunites all fragments of being into a single harmonious frequency. That is why laughter, song, and dance were considered sacred acts. Not entertainment, but medicine. In their gatherings, the mystics would sometimes rise after hours of prayer and begin to dance in silence. No music, no rhythm, only breath and movement guided by inner light. They believed that when the body moves in surrender, it releases ancient grief stored in the tissues. Every spin, every sway was a prayer in motion. Their dance was the embodiment of tikkun, the mending of what was fragmented. To watch them was to witness the transformation of matter by spirit. Eyes closed, hearts open, they became vessels of light moving through flesh. In those moments, they said, the divine looked out through human eyes and saw itself reflected. The transformation was not always gentle. Sometimes the light revealed pain long hidden. Old memories surfaced, tears flowed. But the Kabbalists taught that tears themselves are holy water, the alchemy of sorrow into purification. They believed that every tear shed in truth is gathered by the divine and returned as healing. The ritual was not meant to suppress emotion, but to sanctify it. Anger became fire, transmuted into courage. Sadness became water, turned into compassion. Fear became air, transformed into awareness. And joy became earth, grounding all into wholeness. Nothing was rejected. Everything was redeemed. It was said that when a true Kabbalist healed someone, he did not see disease, he saw distortion. His task was to reintroduce harmony where there was dissonance. He would place his hands near the body, not to force energy, but to listen to it. The field would speak, and through sound, breath, and intention, he would guide it back into resonance. The transformation was invisible yet undeniable. Faces softened. Pain dissolved. The person would often say they felt light entering them, like warmth spreading through every cell. The mystics would smile, knowing that no power had been imposed, only remembered. In this phase of the ritual, gratitude deepened into awe. The practitioner no longer sought healing as something external. They became a witness to the divine intelligence animating them. The separation between I and it vanished. The breath that once felt personal now revealed itself as the same breath that moves the tides, the winds, and the stars. The transformation was total, not of matter into spirit, but of perception into truth. The Kabbalists would describe it as being born anew, though not from womb or water, but from light. And when the ritual reached this point, something extraordinary occurred. The body, once heavy and dense, began to feel weightless. The air shimmered with presence. The boundaries between skin and space disappeared. What remained was awareness, infinite, luminous, silent. The Kabbalists called it Ein Sof Or, the endless light. In that state, they said, there is no illness, no fear, no death, only continuity. The body might still breathe, the heart might still beat, but one is no longer bound to them. The soul, remembering its divine origin, shines through matter like sunlight through glass. That is the transformation, not escape from the body, but illumination through it. And when one returns from that light, the world looks the same, yet feels entirely different. The air carries softness. The eyes see patterns of sacred geometry in leaves, faces, clouds. Even the simplest sound, the drip of water, the hum of a bee, feels like prayer. This is the state the Kabbalists called refuah shlema, complete healing. Not the absence of pain, but the remembrance of wholeness. They said that once this light is seen, even for a moment, it never leaves. It becomes the silent companion in every breath, guiding the seeker through all that remains. Transformation is not an end. It is a return, the rediscovery of the eternal truth that everything, from the smallest cell to the farthest star, is made of the same light longing to know itself. When the Kabbalists spoke of awakening, they were not speaking of knowledge, but of remembrance. They said that awakening is not a climb toward heaven, but a descent into presence. It is not the discovery of something new, but the unveiling of what has always been, the quiet awareness behind the breath, the pulse, the heartbeat, the very act of existing. The ritual that began with water and breath and light would now become something else entirely, a mirror in which the divine recognizes itself. For to awaken, one must not learn, but unlearn. One must strip away the layers of noise, fear, and distraction until only stillness remains. And in that stillness, the infinite whispers the truth that was never lost. You are not seeking light. You are the light that seeks. The Kabbalists called this state Da'at Elyon, the higher knowledge. It is not intellectual. It is experiential, the knowing that arises when the veil between the seen and unseen dissolves. They described it as standing at the threshold where the inner and outer worlds meet. In this place, the body no longer feels separate from the earth, and the breath no longer belongs to one person but to creation itself. They said that when one reaches this state, even the wind speaks in sacred language, and the sound of one's own blood becomes a prayer. The mystics called it the union of heaven and earth, the moment when spirit and matter remember they were never apart. This realization did not happen with thunder or fire, but with gentleness. They taught that the divine never forces itself upon the soul. It waits patiently, like sunlight waiting for a curtain to be drawn. And when the curtain finally opens, light floods not only the room, but everything the room ever was. The seeker realizes that the divine is not above, but within, not distant but intimate, breathing in the rhythm of every heartbeat. The Kabbalists said this is the moment when healing becomes illumination. The body is no longer healed because it is no longer seen as broken. The soul no longer seeks because it realizes it has always been home. The awakening phase of the ritual was both simple and infinite. The practitioner would sit before the water, now still and luminous, reflecting the candlelight like a tiny sun. They would gaze into it, not to see their reflection, but to see through it. The surface of the water became a portal, a living symbol of consciousness itself. They would breathe slowly, rhythmically, matching the rise and fall of the chest to the flicker of the flame. Each breath became a prayer, each heartbeat a drum calling the divine name. The more they gazed, the less they saw themselves as separate. The line between the watcher and the watched began to dissolve, until there was only light observing light, silence listening to silence. This was the sacred moment they called Yichud, unification. It was the consummation of the ritual where all dualities, life and death, heaven and earth, spirit and matter, merged into one field of being. The mystics described it as an ecstatic peace, a still joy that permeates every cell. In this state, there are no boundaries between what is sacred and what is ordinary. Every sound, every motion, every breath is part of the same cosmic symphony. To be awakened is to see the divine pattern in all things, the sacred geometry behind every leaf, the breath of God moving through wind and flame. They said that in this state, the letters of creation, those ancient Hebrew forms that shaped the universe, begin to reveal themselves not as ink on parchment, but as living light within the air. The world itself becomes scripture, written in vibration. The Kabbalist does not read it, they feel it. Every heartbeat, every sound, every scent is a verse in the cosmic Torah, and every human being is a word within that text. The moment one realizes this, separation ends and love, pure, radiant, selfless love, becomes the only possible way to see. Love, to them, was not an emotion, but the recognition of unity. It was the memory that nothing exists outside the one. Science now begins to echo what these mystics whispered centuries ago, that consciousness shapes reality, that observation changes matter, that the heart emits a measurable field that synchronizes with those around it. The Kabbalists did not need instruments to prove this. They felt it. They knew that the light within the human heart could alter the world around it, not symbolically, but literally. When the heart enters coherence, When it beats in harmony with gratitude, compassion, and awe, it becomes a transmitter of divine order. The ancient ritual was designed to bring the practitioner into this exact resonance. And when they reached it, miracles were not supernatural events. They were the natural expression of alignment. One of their oldest writings tells of Rabbi Akiva entering a deep meditation before dawn. He breathed the divine name with every pulse of his heart, until the room filled with a soft glow. Witnesses said his face shone as if lit from within, and his eyes reflected starlight, though the windows were dark. When he opened his mouth, they said, his words were not words but light itself, flowing like water through the air. And those who listened felt a warmth enter their bodies, a peace settle in their minds. He told them afterward, "The light does not come from me. It comes through me. It is the same light that flows through you." This was awakening, the realization that there is no through and no you. There is only light remembering itself in infinite forms. The Kabbalists compared awakening to the breaking of dawn. At first, the horizon blushes faintly, an intuition, a sense of something greater stirring beneath perception. Then slowly, light spills across the sky, revealing what was always there. The mountains, the rivers, the faces of loved ones, all illuminated not by something added, but by what was unveiled. The mystic's work is not to chase the sunrise, but to turn toward it. They said that even turning one's heart slightly toward the light is enough to change the entire trajectory of a life. For where attention goes, energy flows. And where energy flows, life responds. In this phase of the ritual, gratitude becomes prayer. The practitioner lifts the vessel of water once more and speaks softly into it, not words of request, but words of recognition. "You and I are one," they might whisper. "What heals me heals the world." They drink slowly, letting the water carry the vibration of awakening through every cell. The body, now luminous, feels no boundary between inside and outside. The air becomes part of the blood, the light part of the bones. They feel the pulse of the universe as their own heartbeat. And in that moment, they understand why the Kabbalists called God Hachayim, the life, because all that lives is God remembering itself. Awakening is not a moment of escape from the human condition, it is the sanctification of it. The mystics never sought to abandon the body or transcend the earth. They sought to reveal the divine within them. They would say, "Heaven is not above you, but beneath your breath." The true mystic walks through the marketplace and sees angels in strangers. They tend to gardens, cook meals, heal wounds, each act an extension of prayer. In the awakened state, there is no divide between meditation and motion, between silence and sound. Every action becomes sacred because every moment is seen as God becoming aware of itself through form. The Kabbalists taught that once this realization dawns, it can never be fully forgotten. One may drift into distraction, fall into old patterns, but the light remains, like an ember beneath ashes. With a single breath of remembrance, it reignites. This is why they called awakening or Hanistar the hidden light. It cannot be lost because it was never separate. It is the thread of consciousness woven through all things, the pulse that beats beneath both joy and sorrow. When one touches it, even for a heartbeat, life changes irrevocably. One sees that everything, every triumph, every wound, every silence, has been part of the same sacred unfolding. And so as the candle burns low and the water turns to stillness again, the practitioner smiles. They have not reached the end, for there is no end. The ritual has dissolved into life itself. Every breath now is sacred, every heartbeat a prayer. They rise from their place not as someone healed, but as healing itself, a living conduit of the light that was never absent. The awakening is not a destination, but a realization that there was nowhere to go, nothing to fix, nothing to seek. There is only light remembering its own reflection. The Kabbalists said that when the soul reaches this knowing, the angels pause to listen, for in that moment, heaven hears its own echo from within the human heart. That is the true healing, when God, through the eyes of humanity, looks back at himself and whispers, "It is good." When all words have been spoken and all light has been seen, there remains only silence. The Kabbalists called this silence minutia, the divine rest, not the absence of sound, but the presence of peace. It is the moment after the flame has burned through the darkness, when the heart no longer seeks answers because it has become the answer itself. The ritual ends not with triumph but with stillness. The water stands unmoving. The candle melts into a pool of wax, and the breath returns to its natural rhythm. What began as a sacred act of invocation now becomes life itself, seamless, ordinary, infinite. For the mystics knew that the truest mysteries are not in temples or texts, but in the breath, in the pause between thoughts, in the quiet rhythm of being alive. The practitioner, now still, sits before the remnants of light. They have seen the waters shimmer with awareness, have felt the flame speak in silence, have breathed in the sacred name until it was no longer a word, but a vibration that lived within every cell. They do not rise quickly. They remain not in discipline but in devotion. For this final moment is not the ending but the remembering of eternity. They look into the vessel of water one last time. It no longer reflects a face but a universe. The boundaries have dissolved. What once was separate is now whole. The ritual, they understand, was never about healing the body. It was about remembering that the body was never separate from the soul, and the soul never separate from the source. The Kabbalists said that reflection is the highest form of prayer. To reflect is to see oneself not as a fragment, but as a mirror of the infinite. When the heart becomes still enough, it reflects the light of creation perfectly. That is why they practiced gratitude, not as a reaction to blessings, but as a recognition of existence itself. Gratitude, they taught, is how light breathes. Every moment of awareness is a blessing, every breath a sacred exchange. To live in reflection is to walk as a living prayer, every step a note in the eternal hymn of creation. The mystics understood that after illumination comes integration. The light seen in meditation must now be lived in motion. They taught that the true test of awakening is not how deeply one can enter stillness, but how gently one can return from it. To speak with kindness, to move with patience, to see the divine in the mundane. These are the final stages of the ritual. The transformation is complete only when light becomes a way of being, when prayer becomes every act, and when the body, once seen as limitation, becomes the vessel of love itself. In their writings, they compared the awakened soul to a river. It does not hold its water, it gives it. The purpose of receiving light is not possession, but transmission. The one who has remembered must now become the reminder for others. They believed that each soul is a lamp, and every act of compassion is a spark that keeps the flame alive in the world. Healing, they said, multiplies when shared. When you heal yourself, you realign a thread of the cosmic fabric, and that vibration ripples outward to all creation. The ritual of one heart becomes the restoration of many. They also warned that reflection without embodiment is illusion. One cannot remain in the heavens and forget the earth. The purpose of knowing the divine is to bring its compassion into the world of form, to feed the hungry, to comfort the sorrowful, to listen without judgment. These are the extensions of the ritual. They called this Tikkun Olam, the repair of the world. Every healed soul carries within it the power to heal others, not through preaching, but through presence. The healed one walks differently, speaks differently, radiates differently. Their very being becomes a medicine. In the reflection stage of the ritual, the practitioner feels this truth not as theory but as pulse. The heart beats softly, yet within its rhythm lies the pattern of stars. The breath moves gently, yet it carries the same current that moves oceans. The skin tingles faintly, aware that it is both boundary and bridge. They realize that every part of them, the eyes, the hands, the voice, was never theirs but instruments of the infinite, tuned by the song of creation. This understanding does not bring pride, but reverence. For the more one knows of the light, the more one bows before it. They remember now the teachings of the sages. Do not seek to become the light. You already are it. Seek instead to remove what obscures it. And with that remembrance, they understand that the ritual can never truly end. Each morning, each act of kindness, each moment of stillness is another verse in the endless prayer. The candle may extinguish, but its flame remains alive in the eyes that saw it, in the breath that carried its smoke, in the silence that followed. The ritual continues wherever awareness flows. The Kabbalists believed that the universe itself is engaged in this same ritual, the infinite reflecting upon itself through creation. Every star, every atom, every living being is a mirror through which the divine contemplates its own perfection. When the human heart awakens, it joins that reflection consciously. It becomes both observer and observed, both question and answer. The ritual of healing is thus the microcosm of cosmic remembrance, the infinite healing itself through its own reflection in form. As the practitioner finally stands, the air feels different, not because the world has changed, but because perception has. The same light that illuminated ancient temples now rests softly upon their skin. The same silence that filled the mystics' caves hums quietly in their chest. They step into the world not as seeker, but as servant of light. The sacred words that once felt distant now echo naturally with every breath. Ehye, Asher, Ehye. I am that I am. Not a declaration of identity, but a remembrance of unity. They will walk through noise and forget sometimes. They will fall into shadows and remember again, and that too is part of the ritual. For light is only known through darkness, and healing only known through the contrast of pain. The Kabbalists taught that even forgetting is holy, for it creates the space in which remembering becomes meaningful. The journey between loss and remembrance is where love reveals its depth. At the close of the ritual, the practitioner whispers the final blessing, not aloud but within the heart. May this light serve all beings. May this peace ripple through the waters of creation. The candle's last smoke rises like a prayer, curling gently upward before vanishing into the unseen. But they know now that nothing truly vanishes. Every vibration remains in the field, every intention recorded in light. The healing continues endlessly, unseen yet eternal. The room grows quiet again. Outside, morning has come. The first rays of sunlight enter through the window, touching the surface of the water, turning it gold. The world is beginning again, but not as before. For now everything shines with recognition. The water, the salt, the flame, the breath, all are symbols of the same truth. Life itself is the ritual, existence itself is the prayer. And in that golden silence the practitioner finally smiles, not because something was found, but because nothing was ever lost. The healing was not a discovery, but a remembrance. The Kabbalists were right all along. The body and soul were never two, the light and the dark never enemies, the human and the divine never apart. There is only one, breathing through many forms, eternally healing, eternally remembering, eternally awakening to itself.